just would like to remind everybody that this event is being recorded. And if you do not want to be included, feel free to switch off your camera. But it's so nice to see so many of you. So please, we want to see you. I need all those friendly faces out there. So thank you so much. So good afternoon, everybody. I would like to extend a warm welcome on this auspicious occasion to the following: the worshipful, the Mayor of Merton, Councillor Sally Kenny, our local MP of Mitcham and Morden, Siobhan McDonough, the Accoutre Committee, the children and families of Accoutre, our panelists, presenter and arts correspondent, Brenda Emmanus, people's lawyer and poet, David Neita, leader of the Merton Council, Councillor Stephen Alambritis, MBE, Councillor Agatha Akijina, OBE, Councillor Joan Henry, Councillor Brenda Fraser, our very own Accoutre historian, Sarah Connor, lecturer and historian, Nabila Shah, activist and author, Nzinga Asata, board of director and co-host, my very dear friend, Sandra Sinclair. Last but by no means least, I would like to welcome all our many guests and wider community who are attending this social event today by social media. Thank you all so much. So it's a bit difficult to do a round of applause by Zoom. So moving swiftly on. So today's format will start with 3 speakers who will speak for a few minutes each about various Black history topics. And this will then take us into our question and answer session with our panelists. And I'm very much looking forward to this, very excited. But first of all, we're going to kick off with a lovely poem delivered by David Neita. David, over to you.
Thank you very much, Grace, and thank you for putting on this lovely event. The poem I'll share with us today is a poem called River Woman. I wrote this poem to reflect the strength and the emotions and the wisdom of women and the role they play, the Black woman in our community. And it has reference to tears, which I believe sometimes, I remember Joy Gardner's mother saying, my tears will catch them, my tears will catch. There's something about tears. And then the poet, Paul Laurence Dunbar, writes a poem called Life. And in the poem, the first verse of the poem, he says, it's very, really sad about life. It is a crust of bread and a corner to sleep in, a minute to smile, and an hour to weep in, and he goes on, and it's very sort of down. And then the second verse, he turns it and he says, a crust and a corner that love makes precious, with the smiles to warm and the tears to refresh us. And so you get this sense that tears is not always a negative thing. Sometimes it's a really hugely powerful force. So I weave that in my poem. The poem is called River Woman, dedicated to all of us here today. Hope we can take something from it. And your tears wash away all the pain, the aches of a broken soul. A river in your teardrop, your lakes of balm, your heart of molten gold. And your sweat on your skin is sweet, as you toil in the soil for the young and the old. A bead from your brow burns a trail down your cheek. Your charity shows up bold. And your tears wash away all the pain, the hurt of neglected youth. Your love overflows and wash away the lies, restoring eternal truth. As you bear more weight, press deeper in the sand, the moonlight shows your root. And as you lift the little ones across the gate, good ground for them to take root. And your tears wash away all the pain, the damage of the downtrodden folk. And as your music flows to their inner sanctum, the spirit is no longer broke. There is a smashing of abominable yoke, and the flame of the goodness is stoked. And as elation ripples through the space, inspiration lifts everyone. And at the sound of the beautiful voices, even the angels sing along. And as your tears wash away all the pain of the one and the many and the few, and your tears break the dam and your river overflows, healing everyone and you, touching everyone, moving everyone, healing everyone and you. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow, that was awesome. Thank you so much, David. And really, it speaks volumes about the time that we're actually in. And it's a time of change, we hope. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Grace Oyerinde. I'm the chairperson of Accoutre Centre for Learning. I just want to spend a few minutes just sharing a little bit about how this project came about. And it was really a combination of factors, which included the brutal murder of George Floyd, which sent shockwaves throughout the world, the Black Lives Movement that happened in London, and the COVID pandemic that's affected so many of us so deeply. But more importantly, the fact that our schools had no choice but to halt back in March. And many of them didn't fully open until September, which really deeply affected the learning of our young people. All this got me thinking and seeing all what was going on in the social media. My husband and I, who's sitting across the room, we felt compelled to join one of the Black Lives Matters marches. And I've never protested about anything in my life, but we took ourselves down to central London and we walked side by side with all these young people with their placards and their banners. And, you know, we marched with them. And we were so inspired to see so many young people, both Black and white, walking side by side, protesting about what's going on and the inequality, the unfairness against Black people. So I was inspired to do something about this, and I felt that we had to strike now while the time was right, and do our bit to support what was going on. So I rallied some friends, made some phone calls, and before we knew it, a series of meetings was happening over Zoom. And at that point, we had no clear idea what it was that we wanted to do. But very quickly, the conversation turned to that of education. And the fact that so many of us, even within the Black community, we had very little knowledge about the contribution of African and Caribbean people, how they contributed to Britain today to make it what it is. So on the back of that, Accoutre was born, having like-minded parents and local community workers sitting around the table. We decided that we needed to support the education system by offering a supplementary education, which included maths, English, and was underpinned with Black British history. Shortly after that, a not-for-profit community interest was formed, delivering those 3 subjects. And we were delivering these sessions free by Zoom, partly orchestrated by the COVID pandemic that we're in, but also because of a need to capture as many children within the London community who maybe come from low income families. So I'm very proud to say, delighted to say that we went very quickly from the time of inception. Within 2 months, we were delivering our first lessons. And the age group that covered was those in secondary between the ages of 11 and 16. So we're sponsored by, well, we get our funding through contributions from members, sponsorship, and people volunteering their time. And I particularly just want to take this opportunity to thank Merton Voluntary Services Council for their very generous sponsorship. We are still continuing to look for more sponsors and donations to keep this wonderful project alive. Since we started with 8 students and 3 teachers, and we've rapidly gone from strength to strength. We now have 55 students and 6 teachers on our books. And at this point, I just want to bring in one of our students, Carlos, who's going to tell us a little bit about his experience with the centre to date. Carlos, do you want to say a little bit?
Hello. Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Carlos Wheaton. I'm 15 years old. I'm in year 11 at Carsham School. My parents were introduced to Accoutre by my grandmother, and I started in August. Studying at Accoutre has helped me a lot. The teaching that I have been receiving helps to improve my maths and English. In English, my level has improved, and I'm feeling very positive about my future grades. I enjoy being at Accoutre. The teachers help me and explain the subjects in detail so that I understand. And that helps me at school in both my learning and communication skills. Thank you.
Carlos, thank you so much. I mean, you are so encouraging. You are such an inspiration. And I know that you and all our children at Accoutre are going to do very, very well. I mean, we've had so many positive feedbacks in terms of their outcomes already, and we've only been alive for 3 months. We believe at Accoutre that our children have on them a spirit of excellence. And through mentoring, guidance, and excellent education, they will reach their full potential. It took a team of small and passionate teachers, committed. And I'm just going to tell you who they are. So I have Sarah Connor, Angela Ibi-Ronquer, Sandra Sinclair, Nima Nwanda, Isabel Ibi-Ronquer, Eileen Peach, and Chichi Udek-Weres. Thank you all for your amazing contribution to this programme. And then again to our governing body and community supporters. And I'm just going to quickly say their names. We've got Councillor Brenda, Councillor Agatha, Councillor Joan, then Justina, Sarah, Samantha, Susan, Anna, Bo, Sandra, and Kemi. We really appreciate your guidance, the fact that you meet with us on a weekly basis to help steer us in this baby stage of this programme. We are looking for your continued support and funding. And we intend to expand this programme to include the primary sector. So that's children aged between 7 and 10 years of age. And we already have a waiting list for this. So thank you all for listening to me. Long may Accoutre continue. Thank you. So I think on that note, I would hand over to Sandra.
That is lovely. Thank you so much, Grace. You know, fantastic. And I have to say, it's just fantastic and wonderful being part of Accoutre. I love the vibrancy, and I know that that's going to continue. I'm going to introduce 2 speakers now. The first is Nzinga. So Nzinga, can you give us a wave? Where are you? There, right, there's Nzinga, okay. And she's going to be talking about for a few minutes why Black history is so important. But firstly, let me just give you background bio. Nzinga Accoutre. Nzinga Accoutre, a retired health professional. She is author of Women in the Garvey Movement book and poster. She says, I am a Pan-African Garveyite organizer, community activist, mother and grandmother. She is currently a committee member of the Friends of the Black Cultural Archives in Brixton, where she has a deposit of personal historical papers and is the treasurer for the Friends of Pollard Hill Youth Club. So over to you, Nzinga. And remember to unmute, okay? You've got to unmute, okay.
Greetings, everyone. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to be speaking today about the importance of Black history. Now, for me, the importance of Black history is that it fosters a sense of pride. It promotes self-love. and acceptance of the self. It gives confidence and self-assurance. And it's also important for us to acknowledge that historical legacy. So where did Black History Month come from? Black History Month was introduced into the United Kingdom in 1987, and it came as a result of three things. First, there was the launch of the African Jubilee Year Declaration, which called on local and national government to recognize the contribution of Africans to the cultural, economic and political life of London and the UK. The second reason was 1987 was the centenary year, which celebrated the birth of Jamaica's first national hero and Pan-Africanist, Marcus Messiah Garvey. And in fact, I had the great privilege of being the treasurer and fundraising coordinator for the Marcus Garvey Centenary Committee at that time. The other factor that led to the creation of Black History Month in the UK was that it was the 25th year of the founding of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, which was formed to try and bring people of African heritage together across the world, whether they were from the Caribbean, the Americas, or wherever. And that call was put out by a brother from Ghana called Akaba Adisebo. And he was then working at the Greater London Council and drew together activists across the UK to create the first Black History Month celebration. And they said that we must never allow the world to forget that African people had a history long before slavery. So Marcus Garvey tells us that a people without a knowledge of their own history, origin and culture is like a tree without roots. And we all know that a tree without roots has very little use. So that's a great factor of why it's so important for the world indeed to know about African history, but us in particular who come from that community. It can be seen then that it is essential for Black people to celebrate their history. Knowledge of this creates self-pride, dignity, self-awareness, and acts as an inspiration for young people. It's a legacy, letting them know that what others have done, they too can do. And it links them to the achievements of their great sheroes and heroes. There is a beautiful poem by the late Dr. Maya Angelou, which tells us about the importance of knowing our history. It gives us the confidence to navigate ourselves in this world. The poem is called "And Still I Rise." Now, I'm not a great person with technology. I was actually looking for it because I wanted to share a couple of lines for it, but I'm sure people can have a look themselves on the internet and they will find it. And what that tells us is, and still I rise, is that despite exploitation, oppression, that amnesia about our history and our culture, we're still rising and will continue to do so, especially now that there is such a vast awakening across the world of the importance of our legacy and of our history. Now, the celebration of Black history was first created in 1915 by the African-American scholar, Dr. Carter G. Woodson. Now, Carter G. Woodson believed that it was important for people of African heritage to know their history because that would then inspire them to create developments in all spheres of human activity, which has actually happened. So how and when should Black History Month be celebrated? With the international scenes that we saw earlier in the year, sparked by the death of George Floyd, there is a greater awareness of how racism has impacted Black people over many years. Most people, certainly the people that I move with as a Pan-Africanist, believe that Black history should be celebrated every day of the year. And I certainly have been one who have been celebrating it through things like celebrating Malcolm X's birthday, Harriet Tubman's birthday. In May, we have Africa Liberation celebrations where we bring together people of African heritage from all over the world. We also have Heroes Day. We do Kwanzaa in December. So just to show you that Black history is more than just a month, and all of us need that information, and we need to ensure that that's ongoing. So how can we move forward? This is just my personal suggestion, and in the panel discussion, obviously people can share their own ideas. Now, I suggest that parents sit with their children regularly for short sessions, as often as you are able to. There doesn't have to be a prescribed time. Look at the different areas of Black history, and this will enable children to have a better understanding of the historical legacy. They will then gain knowledge that our people have made great contributions in all areas of human existence, not just in sports, music, laughing and dancing. African history dates back to the beginning of time. Scientific evidence shows that Africa is the birthplace of humanity. There is so much information available via the internet, also from books, videos, and in places in the community, such as the Black Cultural Archives at 1 Windrush Square in Brixton, which was mentioned earlier. There's also a large historical deposit at the London Metropolitan Archives in the city, highlighting the work of publishers Jessica and Eric Huntley, and they have a phenomenal legacy. Each year they have an annual conference looking at that work. So these are just some short points where people can actually begin their own research and inspirational tour of Black history. So it's also important to have images in the home and in community centres highlighting Black people's contribution to world history. And in all of these areas, it will provide unconscious learning for children. We also need to recognise that we are agents for change ourselves, and we can create the change that we want to see in society. I'm going to end with a couple of quotes, one from our great African historian, Dr. John Henry Clarke, who is now an ancestor. He's an African-American historian, and also from ancestor Kwame Nkrumah, first president of Ghana. Now, Dr. John Henry Clarke tells us that history is a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. It tells us who we are, where and what we have been, and identifies the way forward for the future. Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, first president of Ghana, tells us, all people of African descent, whether they live in North or South America, the Caribbean, or in any other part of the world, are Africans and belong to the African nation. Thank you. I'm going to ask Grace now if she would just put forward the resources that I had sent her for people, just so that you can have an idea of where to start your search, etc. And this is particularly important for children. There's a group called Book Love, and they sell books for adults and children. And then there is also Kids Black History, which is a useful resource providing information in a fun way for children, and that can be shared with parents and other members of the family. Thank you very much.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much. Can we clap? Yes, that is really fantastic. So much. I think two things that you said, Nzinga. Despite oppression and amnesia, still I rise. And I think that's a famous quote by Mayo that I absolutely love. And I think also the other thing that you said, that I will take away, we are agents of change. So it's not something that we just don't do once a year, but we do it continuous. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. Okay. All right then. So the next person to give a presentation entitled Whitewashing of British History is my dear friend and colleague, Nabila Shah. So where are you, Nabila? If you could give a wave. Okay, fantastic. Okay. And Nabila Shah is a lecturer. She's a historian, writer, and she's a producer for Voice of Islam Radio. She's an engaging and insightful speaker. So Nabila, over to you. Remember to unmute.
I've unmuted. Right. Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk via PowerPoint at you, I'm afraid. So here we go. Right, can you see my screen? Yes,
Yeah.
I hope you can. Okay, so one consequence of the Black Lives Matter movement that Grace was talking about has been the bringing of statue removal back to the forefront of our debate, right? Beginning with the impromptu pulling down of the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol. Others soon followed suit in London and Oxford and other parts of the country. Some historians, like Simon Sharma, agree that these statues should not grace our streets, but be tucked away in museums and properly explained. But others feel we are in some way moving away from the truth by removing them. Defenders of another imperialist with racist values, Rudyard Kipling, do not deny he was a racist. What they object to is the desire to deny he existed. Janet Montefiore, a professor emeritus at the University of Kent and editor of the Kipling Journal, concedes, of course he was a racist, of course he was an imperialist, but that's not all he was. Montefiore argued that Kipling was a magical storyteller and that his perspective was part of history. You don't want to pretend that it all didn't happen, she said. So I want to ask you today, are the well-meaning protesters who pull down statues simply falsifying history? Or are the ones who put them up in the first place the ones who could be accused of whitewashing our histories? Let's begin with the thorny issue of whether statues are in fact history. Some historians would claim that they are not history in themselves, but symbols of the past. Dr. Jessica Moody, a lecturer in public history at the University of Bristol, believes statues can reveal the ways in which the past is used and abused and the mythologies perpetuated through their creation. So, not quite history, but an abuse of the past. While the historian and filmmaker David Olusoga, professor of public history at the University of Manchester, views statues as adoration. They're about saying this man was a great man and he did great things. We can certainly see this in the case of the Colston statue. Bristol Council consciously contrived to revive his name in the late 19th century, 170 years after his death. Before then, his life had been quite conveniently forgotten. Professor Madge Dresser, who is sitting on a commission set up by the council in Bristol to examine his past, explained the Victorians settled on Colston for political reasons. There was a growing threat from organised labour and unskilled labour, so they really wanted to rally people around a Bristol figure rather than on class lines. Ritualised traditions, processions to his statue grew up around that decision to put him up on a pedestal. The historian Margaret Macmillan, writing in Dangerous Games, raised the disturbing point that when history is poorly written, it has dangerous consequences. We must contest the one-sided, even false histories that are out there in the public domain. If we do not, we allow our leaders and opinion makers to use history to bolster false claims and justify bad and foolish policies. One such false history that we are all very familiar with is that of slavery. The impact of this distorted history of slavery has had grave implications on how it is perceived in Britain today by both white and black people. In her book, Why I Am No Longer Talking to White People About Race, Rennie Edo-Lodge explained how confusing she found Black History Month, which seemed to have borrowed the American history of the civil rights movement, but gave little exposure to how black people actually came to be in Britain. Linda Bellos, the woman who spearheaded the introduction of Black History Month into the UK in 1987, revealed her reasoning behind it had been to redress that balance. There's so many people who have no idea, and I'm talking about white people, no idea about the history of racism. They don't know why we're here. This hole in British history led Edo-Lodge to feel betrayed. I had been denied a context, an ability to understand myself. The history she had inherited had made her feel an alien in the country of her birth. David Olusoga would agree with her, pointing out that the history of British slavery had been buried. He cited the Dictionary of National Biography in particular for contributing to this national forgetting, claiming thousands of biographies written in celebration of notable 17th and 18th century Britons have reduced their ownership of human beings to the footnotes, or else expunged such unpleasant details altogether. The way history has been told, therefore, needs some revising. However, the deeper question to ask is why we have been subject to these partial histories in the first place. One answer may lie in whiteness with a capital W. In a bid to overcome racism, academics have attempted over the last 20 years to explore what whiteness is. According to Harris, it is characterized as a Eurocentric worldview that produces the privilege of white skin, while Allen, writing in 2001, deemed it as also key to a global system of oppression by the West over, in inverted commas, the rest, being used to mobilize the civilized, in inverted commas, over the uncivilized, in inverted commas, world. How we remember the past is therefore a key component in perpetuating this view of whiteness. Studies on how the brain remembers, however, have pointed to the pervasive success of whiteness. In 2007, Justin D. Leveson published research which showed that people remembered things in racially biased ways. When asked to recall facts about stories they had been told only minutes before, Leveson found that people were more inclined to remember aggressive facts when the story related to an African American than if the story had been about a Caucasian character. This, he believed, was a result of picking up unconscious biases. Another disturbing aspect of memory is hindsight bias. What we don't precisely remember about our past, research has found we tend to reconstruct based on the present. For instance, if I see myself as a very tolerant person now, I will tend to recall events from my school days to support the view, even if those events didn't happen. So playing with a racially diverse group of children may be constructed by my mind to support who I am today, but be based on a completely false perception of myself in the past. These cognitive failings have serious implications for the accuracy of history, particularly as one of the important criteria for helping plant false memories is a trusted authority repeatedly telling you the lie. They have led Professor Kehinde Andrews at Birmingham University to argue that whiteness is a psychosis. Is a psychosis which defies all logical reasoning. There it is. In the psychosis of whiteness, slavery happened elsewhere and is not part of Britain's legacy, whose role in slavery was actually to abolish it, something that the whole nation should be proud of. A sort of collective hindsight bias in action. He based his conclusions on an analysis of two films recently made about slavery, Belle and Amazing Grace. Both films were made in the 21st century to celebrate the bicentenary of the abolition of the slave trade. However, Andrews shows that both films lack Black agency. They fail to show Black people as anything other than passengers on the road to abolition. Amazing Grace, for example, almost entirely focuses on the white William Wilberforce and his abolition campaign, giving little more than a cameo role to the Black Olaudah Equiano, who was the freed slave who wrote a most influential book on slavery and campaigned tirelessly up and down the country with other Black activists from the Sons of Africa to change public opinion. Belle, although featuring a Black English woman in the title role, the real-life Belle Elizabeth Dido, who was the niece of Lord Mansfield, Chief Justice of England, is portrayed as ignorant of the plight of slaves until it is brought to her attention by her fictional white lover. So, a white savior has to be inserted into this film to explain why she tried to influence her uncle in protecting the rights of slaves. What perhaps is even more disturbing about this psychosis of whiteness is that you do not even have to be white to promote it. Both the writer and director of Belle, for instance, were Black women, and yet despite that, only 3 Black people feature in that film. This falsifying of history, Andrews argued, provided the celluloid hallucinations whiteness needs to justify its actions in the past. Such misrepresentations of the past cast long shadows. On a more current note, the psychosis of whiteness is even evident in explaining away why Black people should be catching and dying from COVID-19 in Europe and America. Some are saying it is a racial failing. Black people are simply more prone to obesity. In her book, Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia, Dr. Sabrina Strings has shown how these anti-fat attitudes originated not from medical evidence, but from 18th century beliefs that an overweight Black body symbolized savagery and racial inferiority. So, a lie begun over 200 years ago has solidified into a racial attitude towards the health problems of Black people today. Why is all this important for history as a discipline? If one of the roles of a historian is to relate what happened, being as close to the truth is vitally important. Another compelling aim of history is to help people in the present understand themselves and their links to the past. Hence, for instance, the historian Penelope Cofield believes, oh, hang on, I'll get the quote. Hence, for example, Penelope Cofield believes...
I'm struggling to hear you. I'm so sorry. Could
you can't hear me because of the weather. Is that all right?
Yes, please.
Hence, Penelope Cofield believed history studies the past and the legacies of the past in the present. Far from being a dead subject, it connects things through time and encourages its students to take a long view of such connections. We might take our eye off the ball and be lulled into histories that are easy on our consciences. We might allow ourselves to be led by distorted accounts, tolerate symbols of whitewashed histories because we cannot be bothered to change them. We might accept false histories as fact because it fits with our prejudices. But in doing so, we are doing a disservice to history and its power to enlighten and heal communities. There you go. I have finished.
Thank you so much, Nabila, for sharing that. Great insight into the review of various books and various films. And again, the term unconscious bias starts to come up, and it's now actually bantered right across media on a regular basis. So that's maybe something we'll address in our Q&A a bit later on. Our third and final speaker today, it's with pleasure that I introduce Sarah Connor. I've known Sarah since she was 3 years of age, my dear Sarah. So let me just quickly tell you a bit about her. She's a historian in linguistics. She's one of our teachers at Accoutre. She graduated from SOAS with a first-class degree. And she's currently, she specializes in the Caribbean Basin. She is studying for her master's at the UCL. And so, Sarah, we welcome you to the platform. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Okay. So on the back of Nabila's talk, we're going to be exploring that in a bit more detail. And as Nabila mentioned, you know, the whiteness of history and how history has largely been whitewashed. So with my talk with you today, we're going to be talking about where do we go from there? How do we respond to that? Okay. So decolonizing history. So as a response to the whitewashing of history, we must work to decolonize history, right? And what does that mean? So it means taking a non-Eurocentric perspective when we're looking at history, when we are exploring history, right? Not looking at history from the eyes of those who historically have dominant or who historically are in dominant power structures, but looking at history from the eyes of the subaltern, right? So the subaltern being social groups who have historically been excluded from dominant power structures, right? Whether those power structures are socioeconomic, patriarchal, racial, cultural, etc., etc. So the subaltern largely includes women, people of color, Blacks, Asians, cultural, African, Caribbean, Latin American, Latino, and the working class. So when we look at subaltern or taking a subaltern approach when studying history, these are the groups we're talking about, looking at history from their eyes, from their perspectives, right? And so, of course, you know, historically, when history has been told, it has been told by not just white, but white middle-class men, right? Who have been in power, whether that be through colonization, you know, several structures that still exist today, as Auntie Grace mentioned about unconscious biases and biases. You know, the Eurocentricity of history still exists today, okay? So I'm gonna be going through with you 4 case studies, if you will, just briefly, because we don't have long, but looking at examples of, well, not looking at examples of history, looking at history, right? From 4 different case studies, and what happens when we take a subaltern approach, and how then we see a more whole and more holistic history telling, okay? So, usually when we hear about emancipation or abolition, right, of slavery, the rhetoric or the narrative is often the European powers realized it was wrong and they campaigned hard to abolish it, to get rid of it, to emancipate the slaves, right? It's often tied into what you call a white savior complex, right? The idea that it was the colonizers, the colonialists, those in power who made this great decision, right? Who were in the moral stance to right a wrong. But when we look away from that perspective, away from history told by the colonizer and looking at it from the eyes of the colonized, we see that's not wholly true, right? What is often ignored is the role of women, for example, or the role of the slaves themselves, who fought for their own emancipation and the emancipation of others, right? So, for example, in Cuba and Brazil, there were what you call free womb laws, right? So in the 1870s, the free womb laws were implemented, and that was that enslaved women, right, women who were slaves, when they had given birth from the 1870s onwards, those children would be free. But that, of course, was only applying to children born after the 1870s. So what about those, you know, the slaves at the time, right? The women giving birth to these children. And what we see in Cuba and Brazil, and as well many other former colonies, was that enslaved women, right, African women who were enslaved, actually used the law, right, mobilized the law against Spain, Portugal, the British, to fight for their own emancipation, right? Often we think that emancipation was this process of, you know, we're abolishing slavery, everybody's free. That's not at all the case, right? You know, even the abolition of slavery in the British colonies, that was introduced in the 1830s, but history tells us that, you know, slavery was still continuing in the British colonies up until the late 19th century, right? The late 19th century. So, you know, these examples just highlight to us the importance of not looking at history from one perspective, not looking at history from a Eurocentric perspective, right? And when we step away from that perspective, we begin to see a more complete picture, the complete truth, right? So this is one case study. The other case study, so fighting for independence in the Caribbean. So often, again, when we think about independence movements, we often think that it's, you know, when the former British or Spanish, Portuguese colonies were granted independence, it was granted by the European powers, right? It kind of suggests that the agency was on the part or on the behalf of the European powers. But we begin to see, when you step away from the Eurocentric perspective and the Eurocentric telling of history, we begin to see that this is not actually the case. So in the Caribbean, from the 1910s, right, there was this uproar of race and class consciousness, right, especially after the First World War. So, you know, many volunteers, Black men primarily from the Caribbean, from Africa, volunteered to enlist to fight for the British in World War I. But their experiences in the British Army, you know, their experiences were very telling, right? Faced with racism, and of course they began to see the class, you know, social class discrimination, right? And also how race and class were intrinsically linked, and quite frankly still today are intrinsically linked, right? And this revelation to a lot of the young Caribbean men fighting in the army, and also those who stayed in the colonies, this then began this kind of questioning, well, you know, if we're not the same as you, if we're not equals to you, if you don't see us as equal, why are you ruling us? Why are we allowing you to guide us, to rule us, to govern over us, right? So this race and class consciousness began, right? It was birthed. And from that, a lot of men, women, working class men and women began to rebel, right? So those who were factory workers, sugarcane workers, you know, et cetera, started to say, well, hold on a minute, no. And there were strikes throughout the colonies, right? Not just Jamaica, not just Barbados, not just Trinidad, but throughout the British Caribbean, there were strikes, labor strikes. And from these strikes, from these rebellions, were birthed trade unions, right? And although we don't have a lot of time to get into this today, please look it up if you can in your spare time. You know, from these labor rebellions, these young men and women, and old, but young working class men and women birthed trade unions, and we see that from those trade unions actually began the course of decolonization, right? Began the course of fighting for independence. From these rebellions, you know, organizations came together to say, okay, let's fight for self-governance, right? Let's fight for independence. Let's prove to these colonizers that we can govern ourselves. And, you know, trade unions were kind of the platform used to discuss these things, to discuss decolonization, to discuss self-governance, governing themselves, becoming independent nations, right? So again, we see that it's not this white savior complex. The British said, okay, let's let them govern themselves. It's the right thing to do. That's not at all what happened. But you wouldn't know that unless you study history away from the Eurocentric perspective, right? So we'll skip this one and move on to the last one because we don't have much time. But often in schools, the very little that we do learn about British Empire, about the British Empire, is very biased, right? The only thing I learned in school really was that the British Empire helped the colonies, right? Helped the former colonies in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and elsewhere. That is the narrative told, right? And quite frankly, many of us from the Black community, from the Asian community and other communities believe that to be so, that without European colonialism, you know, our countries would not be where they are today, right? They wouldn't be wealthy, they wouldn't have infrastructure, they wouldn't have the economic or limited economic development that we have today. And when we, you know, when we are fed history from that perspective, that's what we genuinely think, right? That without colonialism, we would be way worse off. And so on the screen here, the two pictures on the left-hand side, the first one is of British colonialists in what is now Ghana, right? And so we see them suited and booted. And on the bottom one, we see young African men carrying a European colonialist, right? That's not Ghana. I believe that's Belgium. Sorry, I believe that's Congo. So that's a Belgian colonialist. And so yes, it kind of feeds into the idea, especially the bottom picture, that the European powers were superior, right? The European colonialists were superior, and without them, you know, Africa would have been way worse, would have been so poor, would have been, you know, we often hear the word savage, barbaric, right? Tribalism, all these negative and false terms, right? But when we look away from the colonialist perspective, when we start to decolonize history, right, and look more closely at what other people have to say about history, we see that that is not at all the case. So on the right, we have a picture of young men and women from what was Igbo land, now in modern day Nigeria, okay? A very, very wealthy kingdom, wealthy nation state, okay? I do not use the word tribe because also the kind of Eurocentricity of that term in itself, right? The colonial history of that term. But it was in fact a nation, powerful, rich, same way with the Ashanti in Ghana, the Fanti in Ghana, Yoruba in Nigeria, and the Maasai in Kenya, etc., right? The bottom picture we see is a present day picture, and it is the remains of what was, it was a city called Great Zimbabwe, right? And for decades, you know, colonialists and even Africans themselves would question, well, you know, could it be the Africans who built this? Surely not. It's this, you know, great city with walls and complex structures, complex trade structures, etc., etc. And it's kind of almost as if it's impossible that the African man or the African nations could have built that. But it was indeed the case. This was an African city, right? An African creation. So we see that before colonialism, there was great wealth, great infrastructure, great complexity, great centralization in Africa. It does not stem from the white man. It does not stem from the Europeans, right? It does not stem from colonialism. And that is not something you would know from, you know, the school curriculum today, or in most places, right? It's not something that's taught. It's not something that is believed even within the Black community. So that, for example, is, we won't get into that one today, but that is an example. Sorry, these case studies are just a few examples of what we begin to learn when we decolonize history, and therefore the importance of decolonizing history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That is great. Okay, can you hear me? Thank you, Sarah. That's fantastic. Sorry, can you hear me? You can hear me? Excellent. All right then. Do you know, I was just gonna round up really kind of quickly. Thank you so much, Nzinga. I think you said something, and I will reiterate it, that you said we are agents for change, and we are. I loved what you said, Nabila, that, you know, slavery is a false history. So we have, you know, an obligation to do our research and to learn further. And Sarah, thank you, Sarah. Somebody actually put on the chat powerful pictures, and they really, really are. And I think sometimes you don't even have to say too much. You just have to look at the pictures and then look at the history behind it. And somebody also said that the Belgians did a lot of, damage anyway. But can I just wondered, you know, if I can get you to unmute for the moment, everyone to unmute, and to give a round of applause for our speakers for about 2 seconds. Is that okay? All right, that's super. All right, Grace, it's over to you. Okay.
Absolutely wonderful. And again, it shows that our history didn't really begin with slavery. We had a history long before. But I have to say, as a Black woman, I know very little about it. I now want to move into
I'm busy, I can't.
our next phase, which is to hear from our prominent speakers. The first person to speak will be our renowned BBC journalist and arts correspondent, Brenda Emmanus. Are you there, Brenda? I can't see you.
I am. Hi.
Love you to take the floor. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and it's an absolute honour to be part of this conversation. And huge congratulations to our previous speakers, who have been duly enlightening and kind of reiterate the fact why Black history is so important. I've been asked to speak for about 5 minutes on my own personal journey, and I mentioned earlier that my mother went into hospital last night. She's 91, so I haven't kind of prepared a big speech. So I'm going to speak from the heart and take you through it. I am the descendant of West Indian parents, came from St. Lucia, came over here. They're part of that Windrush generation that came here looking for better, good to build their dream into better for their children, and had their dreams shattered, and the reality of coming to a place which welcomed them initially and then kind of shut doors in their faces was had a huge impact on them, and I guess on the way in which they eventually brought us up. My parents came here to kind of for a better start, as everybody did, of that generation, to kind of do well for themselves and to kind of prepare themselves, their kids for better. And I was brought up, as many of us, and I hear this story time and time again, that as a Black woman, you have to try twice as hard, and it's because you're Black, nothing was going to be easy. So that was inbred in me from the beginning. So I kind of grew up with an awareness that the world wasn't fair, and the world would never be fair, and all that. And the only way to make the world fair is to work hard, buy into certain values, and kind of, I guess, what we kind of know now as code switching. But James Baldwin has this amazing quote, which he says, it is the past that makes our present coherent. And if you take that as a premise, then my past was pretty fuzzy. I didn't grow up with a sense of knowing my history. I knew my parents' journey. I knew they were from St. Lucia. I knew a little bit about St. Lucia and the Caribbean. But I didn't grow up with a strong sense of self. And so I battled to fit in. I battled to not be the other. I battled to try and be valued. And those value systems were predominantly white. My teachers were white. The things that everyone aspired to as white. And I came home, where I guess my foundation was strong was that my parents were very much rooted in Black culture. So I'd come home to a very strong Black existence. They didn't give me books, they weren't part of their journey in terms of their education of me, but they took me to St. Lucia. So I knew about my grandparents, I knew about West Indian food, I knew about West Indian culture. My father played Black music in the house. So I was fortunate enough to have a sense of a balance. So my identity, I had this dual identity, which I think kind of helped. And finding out about a wider history was something that came much later to me, and it's only as I got older I realized just how important that was. But what they did give, they gave me a strong work ethic, and I think that's inherent in many of us. We always had a history, we always will. What we talk about Black history is this sense of this historical amnesia, where we're not part of the value system, where our contribution to history, be it the world history or British history, it has been eliminated. And that's why I feel, although I really often struggle with this whole sense of everything about us only matters in October, I understand the huge importance that it's there anyway, and that spotlight is shone. And in hindsight, I think I have a real awareness that the responsibility comes with us. You can't rely on teachers to do everything for us, because the way the school system is set up. But I really feel strongly now that as a parent now, the responsibility of embedding Black history, our history, into my child comes with me. So I think there's a sense of personal responsibility which we all have to adopt. And if we take that Garveyite approach of self-determination, you know, the roots have to, and the roots really important, it has to start with us. So I'm not looking for schools to do all the work, because they won't. You know, they make a promise and they may do it. But I had a conversation with my daughter before coming on here, and we were talking about Black History Month, and I said to her, do you think it's important? She goes, yes, I do. And she said, but what I realised with my school, and she goes to a good school, you know, I pay for the school and I pay for a good education club, but she goes to a school where they highlight multiculturalism as part of their value system and how they draw people in. But she gets a week of Black History Month, and then the minute that week is over, she's seen the posters be torn down, the books put away, and they're left, the young Black kids themselves are left to organise it as if Black History and Black History Month or week in their case is only important to them. And that kind of dismisses the whole purpose. The whole reality is that our history is a common history. Our history is a shared history. Sadly, as Lonnie Bunch puts it, you can tell a nation by what it decides to remember, and we're not part of that remembrance, and you know, until sadly, you know, a man is killed, and then suddenly everyone's aware about how important and how valuable we are. That's one of the lessons for me, is that A, it is hugely important. B, we can't expect the schools to do everything and do our bit. And that's one thing I will perpetuate and continue, and which is why I think Accoutre, what you're doing as a centre is absolutely valuable, and and can't be underestimated. But that said, I did well. You know, I did well because I had parents who were proud. I had parents that worked hard, and I had parents that gave me a very strong work ethic. But my whole existence, my whole journey has been having to work twice, if not 3 times harder than some of my counterparts. And I think I'm not the only one. We're aware of that. That's just the reality of our journey. And I mentor a lot, and I always say to young kids that don't get bitter, get better. Every opportunity that comes your way, you have to seize, and you have to nurture that manure, and you have to do well, and then you have to bring somebody else up with you. Quite often you can see that when some of us reach the top, the first thing you see is the exhaust down, because it's hard. Or in the reality of me working in the media, you're like crabs in a barrel. One job comes up and you know they want their ethnic minority, and you're battling against your friends, the people that you know you sit down and have a glass of wine with, are the people that you're all fighting for that one opportunity. And that's just the sad reality of our existence still. But I don't want to be pessimistic, because I think things have changed. We see whether it's taken, you know, a death of a Black to highlight the injustice, or death of Stephen Lawrence, or whatever. Things are changing slowly but surely. Things are changing, and we have to embrace that, and we have to do our best bit to move that on. I've had a great career. You know, I've seen the world. I've met the most amazing people in this world, from Muhammad Ali to Will Smith to David Hockney to Paul Smith. That's happened for me, and that's been great. But what I want to say to the others in particular, it happened because I'm not the most academic. I never have been. I work hard, I have a strong work ethic, and I knew how important it was to my parents. And I want to emphasize to them that just because you're black doesn't mean it can't happen. If you look at the roll call, even if you just look last week at Lewis Hamilton's amazing achievements, you look at the likes of Serena and Venus, you look at the September issue of Vogue, and the roll call of amazing talent that we've had and have had and will have, because when I see the younger generation and their social activism and their sense of self, it's so different we have now. You know, there is a sense of pride. They have embraced culture. Where I grew up, embracing American culture, because all the success I was seeing were Black Americans. We have young kids now who really believe they have something to offer. They really understand their sense of place, and that fuels me with optimism. It really, really does. I'm not sure what else to share in apart from saying that our history is important, our experience is important, and as much as I think legislation needs to be is important in changing, and as much as I think it's important to have unconscious bias training, and as much as I think the Macpherson was relevant and important, all these things, it's culture change that we need more than anything. And I think a lot of that comes from sharing, hearing and appreciating, valuing the shared experience. So if a white kid sits next to black kids in school and they talk about their experiences, good and bad, that shifts mindsets. You know, if your white friend invites you into their homes and vice versa as children, you grow up together and you understand, you value each other, that changes mindsets. And I think a lot for me, and I still struggle with it, is that mindset that knowing you are enough and you can achieve. Because I grew up with a value, with a culture that didn't necessarily value what my parents had done and what their ancestors had done and what those before me had done. You know, I didn't have that. And now for me, the battle has been to work out, look, when I look at my CV, I have enough, and I've worked hard, and I've had a sense of achievement, and I have given back. And I think that the mindset is as important to our children as knowing their history, for them to know that they have a right and they are part of the United Kingdom PLC, for them to know when they walk out that door, they have a right to feel safe, that they have a right to education, that they have a right to success, they have a right to get things wrong, you know, to make mistakes and to grow and to learn and to experience. And that, to me, is equally as important as them knowing that they come from, their descendants of kings and queens, that they have a roll call of history set from the past, and that they are part of the success of the future. All that is important to me. So I think inspiration for me is as a major source of change. To see people, for Nelson Mandela to see a roll call of leaders of African American and leaders from the past. I remember him saying that's what made him realise that change was possible. For me to sit as a young kid and see Oprah Winfrey and Maya Angelou's on the television, the success of Claudia Jones meant it was possible for me. So for a young kid on a bike, the achievements of Lewis Hamilton, for me who love sport, to see two black women achieve an amazing success with this racket, these things are important. So for me, inspiration is as important as seeing our history and embracing our history. And I'm feeling, as much as I think these are really dark, challenging times, I think it's a reset, and I really am feeling optimistic about what young people will do for us in the future. I think Black history will be a very different thing when their generation of kids look back and start opening their books and looking at films and looking at culture. It'll be a very, very different place, and I'm really optimistic and happy about that.
Brenda, thank you so much. That was awesome. And I love what you said about children having a right to have a sense of belonging to UK PLC. But I'll come back to you on that later. So many questions I want to ask you. But before we go into the Q&A, I'd like to now move on to Dave Neita. Dave, are you there? I'd like to give you a few minutes to say some things about your journey, your background, and so on.
Okay, thanks again, Grace. I'll just break up my journey in 3 very short parts. I'll call the first part Receiving a Legacy, the second part Self-Discovery, and the third part Transmitting the Legacy. So in the first part, what I'll say just briefly is that I was raised in Jamaica, and I think one of the principles I was raised with was this idea that you could do better, than your current circumstances. So I had no clue about university. I remember from a very early age, my mom told me, you're going to university, you know? I didn't even know what it was. And I'm not saying that we should tell our children they're going to university, but I think it was her way of having an aspiration for me. And I compare that to the story of, we all read the story about, it's made into a film and a play, Joseph and his many coat of colors. And Joseph used to wear a ganzi, and his father said, no, you're going to have a coat of colors. And that coat to signify you're going to be greater than your current status. And I think that the Caribbean culture I was raised in, our West Indian culture, Jamaican culture, kind of facilitated that. Okay, it did, definitely. I think more than here in the UK, because I've lived in both countries, that you might go through school and you think, oh, one teacher out of the many, that teacher they fight against me, you know? Or, you know, but generally the society, the whole thrust of the society is to encourage young people to be better than their current status or station or circumstance. And so that is the equivalent of putting on this coat of many colors to say you don't have to wear ganzi throughout your life. You can aspire to something better. And sometimes that can even be misled because sometimes it's ramming down certain professions down children's shoulder. You're going to be a lawyer, doctor, or engineer. But the general thrust of it is good. I would like to import that from my context to here, to the UK, and say we should foster this sort of environment in our home, tweak it, do it a little bit better. The disadvantage we have in the UK is that we don't have that in the schools wholesale. So where I might go through a whole 7 years of school, O levels and A levels, and thinking, I can't remember a teacher who really have a negative feeling about. It might be the opposite here, where a child might think, I can't remember a teacher who have a positive feeling about in terms of somebody who really loved and cared for me. Environments can be hostile in the schools. So I think you have to almost artificially create it by bringing in environments of positive reinforcements for our children. Because I know I benefited from that. I benefited from very positive environments, from home to school to faith organization, church, that kind of thing. Just people in society. I just felt I lived in a society growing up where people wanted me to do well, and they wanted my friends to do well, and they wanted my people who I couldn't get along to do it well. There was a general positive feeling of wanting people to do well. And that, I think, has been a very powerful force in my life. And I think that translating that here, we should try to see if we can do as much as we can to create as much as that. We have the Saturday school movement here, the supplementary school movement, whatever you can do to surround your children in a positive environment where people look at them as little kings and queens. That's how I felt I was looked upon growing up. And I think it added value to me. The second part of my journey is I call self-discovery. And I can reduce it to a little phrase for you. Discover your gifts and talents and translate it into pounds and pence. So therefore, what I'm saying here is that, okay, you might have a cerebral desire to study a particular thing and go for it. But beyond whatever you study or whatever you get yourself involved with, your apprentice or whatever field of work you're going to, there are some gifts and talents that you have that kind of unique to you. Or the gifts and talents themselves may not be unique to you, but within you, they become so unique. And that these gifts and talents can be monetized. And so I think part of this part of the journey is about transferring that into how you can enrich yourself, get rich from it, not just financially rich, but rich in knowledge. I mean, it's so free today. I mean, seriously, we have to pay for it. Now we're paying for it, the school fee and so on. But it's all online. It's all over the place. It's all, if you ask those older than you, younger than you, research, you know, you can pretty much learn any field. But enrich yourself, you know, enrich yourself and make sure you're richer than you need. Make sure you're richer than you need. Don't just have enough for you. Because your talent, the power of your talent and your gifting is so much that you're bound to be able to exceed what is needed just for your own survival. And then that brings us to the third section, is the transmission of that legacy. I'm going to reduce it to another phrase for you again. So use your gifts and talents and those pounds and pence to bring to your community and the world a measure of benevolence in order to make a difference. Okay, so no, it's not just about how I, enrich myself and benefit myself and those around me now, but it's how I take those gifts and talents and those pounds and pence to then create a better world around me. All right, not wait for the government or other philanthropists or so. You become the philanthropist. You become your own government to see what you can do. So, for example, I was told in school that I was known when I first started an art class. First time I ever did an art class, my teacher told me I was not good at art. All right, but I love art. I really love art. I appreciate it. I go to art galleries a lot and I really consume art and I love art. And I decided I want to participate in art. So over lockdown, I decided to start drawing cartoons to express my thoughts and feelings about what was going on. And those cartoons grew and grew. I started to just share them, just give them away, share them. And then now they were published in an international legal journal. And now I'm actually trying to create a book out of it and a career, sort of like a little hobby, a career. And that's the other thing, is about your hobby should never just stay your hobby. See if you can turn it into a little bit of a side career or a full career or whatever. But it's then sharing that to impact upon the world. And now I'm doing public art. So one of the things I'm doing is using my flair and talent for art to work in communities to send an alternative message to the ones that were written on the side of those horrid vans that were sent into communities under the hostile environment saying, go home. And so I'm identifying spaces in communities with places that we can create murals that say, you are home. Because one of the things about the hostile environment and the Windrush scandal that was created, and so a bit of our work I'm involved in now, is that there's a compensation now where you can get money for, if the government damage you or hurt you. But many people did. But the damage and hurt was not just financial, it was emotional. And it wasn't just for people who were from the Windrush generation, but for people who were from the communities who love them, their families, their children, their extended communities as a whole. So I'm trying to bring art to that circumstances, to work in different communities, to work with people from the communities to create art for the community. And this is going beyond now just earning to giving. And I've given a lot over the year. In that second part, when I was trying to find my gifts and talents and so on and so forth, it wasn't that I wasn't giving, but I wasn't giving intentionally. It's just that a lot of people never have the money to pay. They say, do a thing, but we can't pay you. I say, all right, we do it because you can't pay me. You're a charity or you're whatever. You do it, right? But no, and I would never in those days be seeking to look for work that wasn't paid. I was looking to be paid. Now I'm looking to pay forward, to use the resources I have to give back. And there's nothing more enjoyable, there's nothing sweeter than giving back to society out of the wealth and the abundance that you have, because that's when you're truly, truly powerful, because you're not looking to get, you're looking to give. And there's really, I've not felt anything more empowering and powerful than actually giving and intentionally giving. So that would be my wrap up. And thank you for having me.
David, thank you so much. And in your story, I felt your impassioned plea to our young children. Gifts and talents, pounds and pence. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story. It's very, very encouraging. I'm going to now turn to Councillor Stephen Alambritis. Are you there, Mr.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Grace. Can I just thank you and Sandra for setting up Accoutre. Thank you for what you do for children in particular. And I'm so pleased that Merton's Voluntary Service Council is one of your supporters. They're an arm of the local authority, so very pleased with that. And that your governance is in good hands, seeing that Agatha, Brenda, and Joan are on your governing board. Now, when George Floyd was murdered, leaders here under my leadership undertook a statement in support of the Black Lives movement. We lit the council building purple. The all-party statement was put out through all our social media. and the council, along with Croydon, because you will recall Patrick Hutchinson, that brave act of humankind by Patrick to safeguard and carry an anti-protester. Patrick lives in Croydon, but works in Merton, and so the two boroughs are working together as we speak to recognise that brave act on the part of Patrick Hutchinson, and we hope that that will bear fruit. The council will do all it can and continues to do all it can to tackle inequality. There's a long way to go. We're working with Simon Woolley from Operation Black Vote, with Baroness Doreen Lawrence, who's doing a piece of work for the Labour Party. And we know that the impact of COVID is disproportionate on our BAME community, and our Public Health Director is doing a piece of work with our BAME councillors and with our experts in this field. And tonight, as we meet, the local government awards are on, and one of the awards that we've been shortlisted for is our work on diabetes and the scourge of diabetes, which is sometimes greater on our BAME community, and therefore we're very, very keen that we do all we can to clamp down on diabetes here in this borough, and that is shortlisted for an award for tonight. We'll continue to engage with our BAME voice. Hannah Neal there and I are in regular communication with our joint consultative committee, and that's Edith McCauley, who's been a big leader in that, and with our BAME staff forum, and continue to look at issues like the lack of BAME and black directors at the most senior level, looking at the Rooney Rule, where a shortlisted candidate must come from our black community, our BAME community, looking at unconscious bias. Grace, you raised that. I look at myself all the time. We all need to look at each other. I myself was born under colonial rule in Cyprus, under British rule. My parents collected me, my three sisters, and with a fiver in their pocket, came to London in 1964. And in the school playgrounds of primary schools and secondary schools of London, of course, I faced racism, called names, my Caucasian looks, my Mediterranean looks, and the fact that for the first 3 or 4 months, I couldn't speak a word of English. So I know what it's like. We need to strive and never be complacent until we get complete and utter equality and lack of discrimination. I'm pleased to say that whenever we survey our residents here, they say that this is a place where they feel they're not discriminated, where they feel there's a sense of fairness, but there's still a long way to go. And I am committed to that as leader of the council. I've been bowled over by the speakers, by David's poetry, by Carlos and his bravery to be in front of so many people. Grace, this is one of the biggest Zoom attendee meetings I've attended. It's normally 5, 10, 15, 20 at the most, perhaps 30 if it was the leaders of all the London boroughs, but you have here, I understand, 70, 71 people, and that's a testimony to your hard work and to Sandra's. So if the council can do more for Accoutre, please do get in touch, and we'll continue to do as much as we can for our BAME community. There is still a very, very long way to go, and we're looking at all the issues thrown up by the Black Lives Movement. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and please, this is an open council, a fair council. This week we committed and pledged to underwrite and to fund all free school meals applications, whether now this week or retrospectively, and we're one of the few councils in London that continues to fully fund 100% council tax support for all its residents. And in the main, the vast majority of those residents are in the east of the borough, and so we will continue to support people on low incomes. But thank you for what you do to bring people up in terms of aspirations. And David's point is very, very engaging. I'll be stepping down after 10 years as leader, and I'm going to take on David's point about doing something for nothing. We all work, we all need money to pay the bills, but he's quite right. Isn't it good to give rather than to get? And over my life, I've given by being a counsellor. My counsellors do that as well. And I've been a football referee on the pitches of Merton, where you give of your afternoon, your evening, your weekends, and volunteer, treasurer for societies. And David, you're quite right. Giving is so much better than getting. Thank you all.
David, thank you so much for your contribution today. Sorry, Stephen.
I kept mentioning David, that's why.
You mentioned David. No, we really appreciate your contribution. And we appreciate Merton for constantly having an open ear, listening to what your community are saying and supporting in every way that you can. We really appreciate. Thank you. So on that note, Sandra is just going to do a quick roundup of all the other panelists today before we just jump straight into our Q&A, because time is now of the essence. So Sandra, who else is on the panel today?
Right, okay, can I just quickly say, Grace, that before we start, thank you so much. I think, I know everyone keeps talking about Dave, you know, whatever, but Dave, thank you so much. It is so much better to kind of give. I think also, Brenda, I loved what you said when you said, don't get bitter, get better, and bring someone with you. And I think that's what we're gonna, you know, stream through Accoutre. And I think, was it kind of Councillor Stephen, that I understand you're going off to become an MP later on. But anyway, just to say thank you so much. And I think it just goes to show about racism. It's not about, you know, being black, but, you know, racism can also be if you're white, or, you know, if you're from, you know, it's like, say, a different kind of colour anyway. And I think
don't forget, Sandra, that Brenda's also leaving the BBC. Yes. So we can't wait to find out what she's going on to do.
Bigger and better things.
Brilliant send-off that the BBC gave her last week.
That's good. No, that is really good. Okay, I think, do you know what? I live in Wandsworth, but I think I might come to the very pioneering borough of Merton, because I think Merton is really pioneering. Anyway, so, yeah, definitely. But listen, really quickly. So if I just go through the 3 councillors that sit on our board, and we've just got the best, you know, in our organisation. So really quickly, if I go to Brenda Fraser, Councillor Brenda Fraser, can you wave for us, Brenda? Okay, so Councillor Brenda has been a councillor for the London Borough of Merton since 2010. As a councillor, her ward serves over 11,000 residents. She has served the borough of Merton as mayor during the year 2016-17. She has served for 10 years as a special police constable. She is ambassador for Age UK Merton and has lectured for 12 years with the Open University in healthcare. And she also sits on our committee and helps steer our work. There was so much, I have to say, to write about Councillor Brenda, but we just had to, you know, minimise it. So she is an unbelievably accomplished woman. And the next one is Councillor Agatha Akijina. So sorry, Councillor Akijina, right, okay. So if you can give us a wave. Fantastic, yes, so Councillor Agatha Akijina, OBE. Councillor Agatha was born in Ghana and has lived in England for about 55 years.
Wow.
Her previous roles have been that of nurse, secretary, telex operator, so you know that's going back a long time with telex, okay? Telex operator for an airline. She was mayor of Merton in 2014 and 15. She's been a councillor for 14 years, and in her words, she says she likes people, and that has made the role more interesting. She also sits on our committee and helps to steer our work, okay? So we're blessed there. And the final councillor is Councillor Joan Henry. Where are you, Councillor Joan Henry? Okay. So Councillor Joan Henry. So Councillor Joan Henry is the immensely brilliant vice chair here at Accoutre, and she's absolutely stunning. We love her. So okay. She grew up in Jamaica and trained as a cosmetologist. At age 23, she became a very successful businesswoman. She came to the UK aged 27, studied at Queen Mary University and graduated in nursing. She later became a special police constable. She is the volunteers queen of volunteering for victim support, homeless charities. She has fostered 16 young people. Is that right, Joan? About 16? Okay. I've spotted around 16 young people that still keep in contact to this day. And she's very active in Merton, and she also helps us steer the work at Accoutre. So those are our counsellors.
And I just want to give them a round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us. And can I say 60 young children, and I struggled to cope with 3.
No, 16, not 60, 16. And,
do you know what, Joan? I did say to her it was 16, not 60.
16. And I just want to say this, I know, and one of my young person just bought his own house.
Lovely.
Oh,
okay.
wonderful.
And he left out my house and bought his own house.
Fantastic.
That's fantastic. So just jumping straight into the Q&A, I'm going to ask my first question, and I think because there's so many of us, I'm going to direct it at our 2 Brendas. So talking about Black History Month, what does it mean to you? And how can we make it relevant for our young people today? And that's the 2 Brendas first.
Right, Brenda Emmanus, do you want to go first?
Okay, for me, I think it's an opportunity to inspire and instill pride of self in community, and particularly in our community. It's a sense, it's an opportunity to share our history with the wider community, and to set it. But I also think now in 2020, it's not just an opportunity to look at the past, it's an opportunity to celebrate the present. And our unsung heroes. And I mean, what happens quite often and justifiably in Black History Month, we hear about the Rosa Parks and we hear about Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela, but there are so many unsung heroes in our community. I mean, in fact, the work that you're doing is worthy of celebration. And I feel like in 2020 we need to maybe revise and readjust what it means to us, as well as celebrating the great and the good, which we already know about. It's an opportunity to shine the light on our unsung heroes of our community, people that are doing great things that we never hear about. It's also an opportunity to look at our young people and the amazing achievements that they have, which we perhaps never have the opportunity to hear about. It's an opportunity for schools to engage in a very different way with students, with the Black students, and for everyone to be involved in this mission to right the wrongs of history, and not just expect the Black students to do all the work, and it is just for them, because it's for all of us. So I think it's historically, I think we understand what the ambitions of this month. But I think it's a time for slight revision and readjustment about what it means. But it essentially is about a redress and rebalance of history, past and present, and a celebration of all our achievements.
So Brent, over to you. Do you think 1 month is enough?
I came here in 1965 to join my parents, and it was August, and so the weather was good. But I soon realized that really, if there is all racism here, there is a reason. People wanting to look the way I look. And I haven't put any sunshine on or any of that. And I don't know why color should mean that much, because in fact, if you should take the skin off, you will find the same thing underneath. If you cut me, if you go into literature, it says, will I not bleed? Yes. And so therefore, I thought, how can we change this? And I went into nursing and I spent 27 years. I love people. I love to give. I listened to David. Some of what he was saying comes straight from the Bible. It's better to give than to receive. And that's something that I do on a daily basis. And I carried on in that way till I went into teaching. When I did my PGC HP in Greenwich, I was told you cannot go to East London, which is where something was dragging me to. Because really, you're going to waste your time. Why not go to Kent? And I said, I don't know, but I'm going to East London anyway. I'll find out what they're doing over there. I am so, so happy and grateful that I went there and spent about 14 years at one of the Federal Education College. I realized very soon some of what was said, that girls don't matter. If you go into history, women didn't matter. if any of what you read is the men because they can work, the women. But I have a feeling that people hadn't looked further, because without women, there will be no children anyway. And so therefore we'll have no world. So people are very narrow in their thinking. And I felt I had to enlighten my students. So I went a little bit further. I was told, don't do too much. They're about 85% girls, and they won't go into much. And I said, that's not how it's going to be. Otherwise, I'm not going to be here. You really employ the wrong person. And so I had a chat with my students and everything. They told me some really things that made you feel really like crying, but crying doesn't help. And tears was mentioned in David's poem. He always does these things and make me feel very emotional. But it was mentioned, but tears can be positive, as he also said. And I said to my students, I've heard you, let's park all the negative bits, all the stresses you've been through, and we're going to work really hard. When I finish with
down a little bit, Brenda, if you could just round it up because of the time.
Yeah, when I finish with you, you will actually probably be able to buy Buckingham Palace. So we're going to work really, really hard. I have continued it in that way, and from the police, I went, as Brenda mentioned, other people, to help with some of the things that were happening to Black people that I was so hurt about. And I thought, it's no point being bitter. You need to go in and do something. And then from there to the council. And this is where we could be here till Christmas. But
thank you so much, Brenda. I just want to interject a little bit and just delve a little bit further with this point. And I'm going to address Councillor Agatha, OBE, and Nzinga. So I just want to touch on this a bit more, because Michael Holding, one of our famous cricketers, he said something. He said, history has been written by the conqueror, not by those who are conquered. In other words, by those who harm, not by those who receive harm. And so on that basis, should the school curriculum be changed to include African and Caribbean contributions to history?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's very right. I think history, the schools should actually include Black history all the time. I don't believe in this 1 month issue, because Black people don't exist just 1 month of the 12 months of the year. And our lifestyle and our history, our culture doesn't exist for just 1 month of the year. And as we're all intertwined in the schools with all various cultures, we should learn about each other. And without Black history, there will be no history, no world history. This is what people got to understand, that we are the original history. You know, man came from the Black man, or woman came from the Black woman. So you have to really find out where we all come from, and to reiterate the fact that when you do realize we are all the same, bar the color is different because of what regions we're from. We're Black because we're in the sunshine to protect us from it. White because it's cold. I mean, if you look at history, that's why we're all different colors. But people have got to stop feeling that they're superior than others. They're not.
Can I interject as well? Thank you very much for that, Agatha. And Nzinga, your thoughts very quickly.
Well, my thoughts, as you heard when I spoke, is that Black history is every day of the year, and we have a responsibility to ensure that our children and our grandchildren and so on have an understanding of what that's about. We have books out there, there's literature, information, and we need to be finding it. We've got Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, The African Origins of Civilization, Dr. Ben Joseph Buchanan, The African Origins of the Major World Religion. The documentation is there. We have no excuse for not knowing and for not sharing it. All my life, I came here when I was 7 years old in 1959. So I've been here a long, long time. And as Brenda from the BBC was saying, we come from a long line of achievers. Our people have suffered greatly, but they've never given up. And I think that that's the important thing. I think parents need to put pressure on the schools and on the political machinery if we want change and if we want implementation of our history in the schools.
Thank you very much, Nzinga. Before, Sandra, you may want to go to the floor to just see if anybody has any questions, but can I also say that Sarah should also be on the panelists, so perhaps we can highlight Sarah as well. So Sandra, any questions from the floor?
Yeah, do you know, I'm just looking at the chat, and I think just really, there are actually three things, but I'll be really quick. Somebody said that there's something called Black Classical Music, The Forgotten History, and that's with Lenny Henry and Susie Klein, and I think all the information is there. So do look at the chat and take a picture if you need to. Somebody said, how can we change the way we teach Black history in schools? I think that would be good for Sarah. And how do we get BAME community to engage? But I think for Sarah, if we could look at, how do you think, Sarah, because you're 20 something and other, still a baby, so how can we change the way we teach Black history in schools?
I think the first, sorry, motorbike. I think Black history in schools outside of October. As you've mentioned, it is a shared history, right? Black history isn't just specific to the Black community, it is history itself, in and of itself. So I think teaching it to be incorporated in the curriculum is first point of call. Second of all, it goes back to decolonizing history. So not teaching history from the perspective, or from a Eurocentric perspective, but teaching it from.
So Sarah's freezing there. Sarah, sorry, you've frozen. So I'm going to just move on with my next question so we can get as many in as possible. And I wanted to address it firstly to Dave, because Dave, you talked about, you know, growing up in Jamaica and forming your identity outside the UK. So when you look at that, your strong sense of identity, how do you compare that to the youth who are born and bred within the UK?
I think when you grow up in a country like Jamaica or any Caribbean country, you can say you're that thing. I'm Jamaican, and it's not controversial at all. You can say I'm Barbadian, West Indian, St. Lucian. It's not controversial. But here, can you say you're English? That's the issue. That's the cognitive dissonance. And yet, when we were growing up and going to school in Jamaica, and a Black child from Britain was sent out to Jamaica to be educated by their parents with foresight, we call them English. We say, Wagwan English, we have to say English. So we call them English because they come from England, but they can't say they're English in England. And when you're born in a place and you can't say you're the nationality, there is something incredibly toxic about that. And you ought to be able to say that. Now, if you're a descendant of a West Indian, you're always us. No one has to worry about that. This would be my message to anybody born here. I don't have to ask the African if I'm African. I feel African because of my roots. I claim that. My whole legacy and heritage is African, but I'm still Jamaican, still West Indian. Now here, and this is going to be a controversial, you're born here, you're British. You're also English. You're also European. This is yours. England was first governor of England was an African. So your heritage, all your line, your bloodline, your blood, sweat, and tears is here also. It doesn't prevent you from being an African. I'm going to suggest that if you're made to feel this is not your place, this is not your country, you cannot claim it, possess it, dominate it, work in it, challenge it, you're going to have a cognitive dissonance that's going to affect you. And I would suggest to every Briton, every Black Briton, to claim this space as your own, because you don't have to worry about your heritage, where you're from. That's yours too, but this is yours. And when you decide it's yours, you're going to be more involved in it. You're going to possess it more, occupy it more, participate in it more. And you can see what happened when Afua Hirsch was talking to that Nick from the LBC, and she was criticizing some of the policies in Britain and statutes and so on. And he said, if you don't like it that much, why don't you just leave?
Yeah.
Can you imagine that? The two of them born in a hospital in this country. Both of them were delivered in a delivery ward in this country. But he feels he can say that to her. So she turned to him and said, as Afua would, hold on, you don't have a problem with your country too. You don't have a problem with this place. And say, yeah. She said, can you imagine me asking you to leave here? So you see, we have created this narrative, and I think that is it. We have to change the narrative to say, this is your country, right? Wherever else is yours, this is your country. And we got to take ownership of it, and we got to challenge it, belong to it, and let it belong to us, and shape it in a vision, because the people shaping it at the moment are not doing a very good job. So we have to bring to it our culture, our kindness, our generosity, our humanity, or our love to the place where we live. And that's what I would suggest.
Can I just say, many of the panelists around this table, even though you were born outside of the UK, you have had children who were born and bred within the UK. And can I just cut to my experience very, very quickly? As a person who was born and bred in the UK, my parents are of Nigerian heritage, but never really feeling British, always feeling a sense of being a visitor. And even though I had that passport, which was green at the time before it was red, I remember my experience even going back to Nigeria, feeling like a foreigner, but although not really feeling like I belonged as a British. Do any of you feel that your children had the similar experience, similar thought process, had a confusion about their identity? If I go to Nzinga, yes?
Well, my children feel they're British. I feel Jamaican and African, so that's just where it's at. But they see themselves as British because they were born here.
Amazing. Amazing. Agatha, what do you think? Do your children feel 100% truly British?
No, they feel British. But my son, when he goes home to Ghana, he feels at home. It's really funny, even though he feels British or when he's here. But as soon as he steps there, he says, I'm home. And he doesn't go often. I mean, in his lifetime, he's 30s. I mean, he's been about 5 times, but he said something makes him realize that he's at home, even though he was born here.
Does he speak the language?
Very badly, yes.
Amazing, amazing. And Sarah, as a young person growing up in Britain, would you, do you feel 100% that you can claim Great Britain as your homeland, as, a sense of true belonging, as you would do standing next to your white counterparts?
Definitely not. I mean, in primary school, I did feel like that. Secondary school, it was a predominantly white secondary school, more suburban, and they definitely let me know that I couldn't claim Britain like they could. I wasn't British like they were. But yeah, I would to all the young people, I'd say to not at all let that deter you. You can be both, right? Have that dual nationality, have that dual identity, both British and Caribbean, African, Ghanaian, Nigerian, Jamaican, Barbadian, Bayesian, wherever you're from. So there's not particularly the two, right? They're not distinct, wholly distinct from each other. They can intermingle.
Okay, time is running. So I want to address this question to Councillor Joan and Councillor Stephen. Now, all children come into the school system relatively the same. So when you talk about their levels of entry, it's very comparable. The ethnic groups, that compared with white people, they more or less come in at the same level. However, something happens within that system. And before they finish the secondary school system, Black children tend to be significantly behind with their outcomes and their grades compared to the national average. What goes wrong? What happens there? Does anybody want to? And I asked that question around unconscious bias. Does it exist within the school system?
Okay, Grace, I will start. And I will start. The reason being is, when I became a councillor, I was really shocked about a lot of issues and concern that I have within the school system, not only in our borough, because I travel around many different places, right? First of all, what I noticed that some of our services for children's services, especially where our Black kids are, because remember, some of our Black family, our BME family, they work 24/7 to, you know, bring food on the table, pay their rents and everything, and also to ensure that their children go to school. Services like our youth centers, service like our children's centers. I'm not talking about our government. I'm not talking about our boroughs, but what I'm saying, a lot of these things were going out. They were taken away from our children. And we in Merton, we fight to keep them. People like yourself and the rest who have children, as you know, in school as governors, you stand up hard to ensure that our children get these things in place. However, back to your question, yes, some of our children suffer. They have the same grade, they get the same training, but they never get the same standard, right? Leaving school, they work very hard, but they never get to reach where they wanted to go because they always put back for whatever reason. I don't know, possibly Stephen can answer that.
And Stephen, you know, as a council, you have worked so hard with introducing this unconscious bias training. Do you want to pick up on, you know, whether there is this unconscious bias within the education system and if it's truly impacting on children of colour?
I think there is an unconscious bias in all systems, all organisations. It's something that we need to be constantly vigilant against. And so it is very, very important on a number of other boards, and the term unconscious bias is coming to the top when discussing personnel issues, employment issues, promotion issues. What we need to do is to make sure people get into work, get on in work, and get promoted in work. And as David said, it's about being ambitious and going over and above what you think you can achieve, because there's always more to achieve. With our young children, we're one of the few councils that provide council tax exemption for our care leavers. So when our children are in our care and we look after them, and a lot of them go on to university, as Joan said, one of her foster children went on to buy their own house. This is what we want. But when you take the leap into independence, finances can be very difficult. So in Merton, our care leavers are exempt from the council tax. And those are the kinds of imaginative policies that we promote. But unconscious bias is everywhere, and we just need to be aware. We need to ask ourselves about that every day, when we're traveling, when we're working, and even when we're at home, when we're watching television. Very, very important. It's the next stage that we need to tackle.
Wonderful, amazing. And Brenda Emmanus, if I can quickly ask you the next question. So what advice would you give to young people who feel that they will never make it? They often say it's due to the colour of my skin.
It would be to don't leave this world without having fully expressed yourself and realise that you are here and you have a right, and that you don't come here to be anybody else. And I think it's important that we're fueling them a sense of value and a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging, and that comes from love. And we've got to love them and allow them to learn to love themselves, and recognise the fact, as Dave said, that they have a right to be, they are British, and they have a right to achieve every single part of their dream while they are here. And that's going to come with support from us. I think every child that's involved in this project or Accoutre will do well, because for them to be part of this, they have the love and the support, and they have people that believe in their expectations and expectations in the mind and your mind. I keep going back to mindset, because I know for me that's part of the poison. If that's not right, if the support system's not there, if you don't feel love, then the battle is much harder. You know, all institutions and organisations, you're going to be faced with unconscious bias. you're going to face with obstacles, you're going to be faced with a glass ceiling and whatnot. And then we haven't even touched on intersectionality. If you're a black woman, you know, if you're a gay black man, all these things that make life much more complicated. There's not room in this platform to talk about it. But I think a strong sense of self, a strong sense of belonging, a strong sense of having a right to achieve and succeed is as a starting point. And they have a roll call of examples to look up to already, that we're blessed with that, and we mustn't deny that fact.
Thank you. Sandra, do you want to ask?
Right, do you know what? I'm just conscious of time. I think we've got about 4 seconds, Al, isn't it? Literally. Yes. And can I just ask the panelists, and if I start with Joan, and honestly, no more than 5 words, okay? If you were Prime Minister for one day, what change will you bring to our education system and why? Councillor Joan. Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Councillor Joan.
My change is a must that Black culture, Black history, it's one of the priority on our curriculum in school. And the reason being is our British Black children have no knowledge about where they come from or their ancestors. All they hear about maybe possible Bob Marley music and, you know, Marcus Garvey, and we need them to know exactly more than that, the food and everything that they eat.
Fantastic. That is super, Joan. Okay, can I ask Dave, what would you change, Dave?
Do you want to unmute yourself, Dave?
Yeah. Okay. So if you're Prime Minister for one day, what would you change in the education system and why?
I would overhaul the whole system. It is over 100 years old. It is now redundant. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for anybody, black or white student. I build it from the base and build it in mind with the entirety of the diverse population it has. It must serve the diverse population of students, and it must be egalitarian. No two-tier system with privileged students getting the football fields and private students are walking through gunshot-ridden areas. No, equalize the whole thing. Make it
I like the egalitarian. Brenda, sorry. Oh, sorry, Dave, you finished? Right, Brenda,
yep.
I'd see. So Brenda, if you were Prime Minister for one day, what would you change? Sorry, Brenda Emmanus, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're on mute.
I think Dave knocked it on the head, really. I think the fact is education is a right, not a privilege. And the sooner there's equality of access, equality of opportunity, the better.
Yes, perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Councillor Brenda?
Actually, most of what I was going to say has been said already. The whole system needs changing. We need to know who we are and what we're doing. And it's not just about Black culture.
Lovely, fantastic. Thank you so much. And can I just leave it with Stephen Alambritis? What would you change? I know that you touched on some bits and we're going to leave it there, yeah.
Yes, obviously the root and branch that Dave refers to is very, very important. But in terms of an achievable thing, I like Sarah's point that the history should be about those who were colonized, not the council, not the colonizers. It should come from the view of those who were disadvantaged, not those who had privileges.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Can I pass it on to Grace? Because I think we are
Wow, it's now 5 o'clock. I'm very conscious of the time and I hate to run over. So I just want to thank everybody, all our panelists, all our guests, speakers, all the attendees in the room, the mayor. We are so honored to have you present with us today. And I want to just give a special thank you to our technical person, Al Shabana, who helped to make this possible. He's done an amazing job navigating all the screens. So thank you all so much. If you do want to know more about Accoutre, I think you'll find in the chat our website, which is accoutre.org.uk. Anything you can do to help, we would so appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody. We're going to play some music and hopefully you can dance out. Thank you.